Hello, this is going to be a watercolour tutorial. I'll be painting a cathedral, in this case Lichfield Cathedral, which I'll probably talk more about later on. This is my first YouTube video tutorial, so probably there'll be many mistakes. What I thought I'd do first is very quickly just go through my materials and then get on with painting. I will probably also, improve this in the edit, hopefully. So first of all, the paper I'm working on. Now that is Saunders Waterford paper. This is cold press or knot paper, as it's sometimes referred. So just if you don't know particularly about watercolour materials, this watercolour paper is kind of an in-between. I often paint on rough paper. I rarely paint on hot press, which is very smooth. This is somewhere in between. In terms of the paints I use, so these paints over here, these are pretty much all, I think they're all Winsor and Newton. These are not professional watercolours, these are the student quality, and I think they're perfectly fine. I don't think you necessarily need to go for the artist quality when you're starting out, and certainly the majority of my paintings, while I do occasionally use the professional ones, the vast majority are using the student quality. In terms of the brushes, now I don't know an awful lot about names of brushes, okay, so I use these mop brushes quite a lot. They're very useful. I'll probably be using this brush, a Daler Roundy round wash brush, to put the first wash down. This little brush I use for various points if I need, a little smaller than this, but generally I'll probably do most of the painting with these two brushes, or certainly that brush. Occasionally I will use one of these brushes. The only problem with these sort of brushes is, although they're very good at giving sort of loose marks, they do, mine certainly, because this is a cheap one sort of from Amazon, but they do shed some of their hair quite a lot. And then this little liner brush I use a lot for, the fine detail at the very end and signing it and that sort of thing. So then I've obviously got my water, which is over here. There you go, a lot of water. I've also got a spray bottle. Now I use the spray bottle quite a lot. Certainly I will cover the entire picture in water before I actually start painting anything. Other things, I've got some, paper towel, or kitchen roll, as I would call it, but for potentially American viewers. Kitchen roll I would use. And then the other thing is I have a hairdryer. Now I don't always, other brands are available by the way, but I don't always use a hairdryer. Sometimes I let the painting dry naturally, but for the purposes of this video, I thought, let's use a hairdryer. This is the pencil I use to sketch the image with. Now that is a Derwent Precision pencil. I'll be entirely honest, I don't actually know what the lead size of this is, but it's kind of it must be a sort of a medium. It's not particularly hard, but it's not very soft either. It's somewhere in between. It's probably, and often I would do a drawing with a HB pencil, to be honest. Now the drawing probably looks more complicated than it actually is. If you were to go right up close to it, and I don't want to mess up the thing, but if you go right up sort of close to it, it's essentially lots of squiggles. I try not to draw sort of very straight lines. I try to keep them rather loose, because I think that lends to a better effect in the end. I think the other thing I would say is it is good to take a long time over your drawing if you can. Obviously, if you're drawing on location, on plein air, perhaps you can make the drawing a lot quicker and it could be a lot looser. But with something like this, which is a bit of architecture, I think it does lend itself to spending a bit of time. So I probably spent about half an hour on this drawing. I've drawn Lichfield Cathedral, which is this cathedral is, many times. So I guess the thing is, I would say, is if you've got a sort of more solid drawing, it sort of makes the painting element a bit easier. I mean, let's see how it goes. It might be terrible, but let's have it. Let's see. So yeah, take time on drawing. The drawing is based on an earlier drawing I did. Now, if I've been able to work out the technology, I remind you this is my first tutorial, I will put that in the video so you can see the drawing I'm basing it on, but also images from things like you know, Google Maps, you know, Google Street View. I find very useful as well. So let's just get started, okay? Because I seem to be hesitating and not getting on with the painting. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get my little spray bottle, and I'm going to spray all over the paper. You see the paper is on a board, just a board of MDF, and it's stuck down with masking tape, which probably because I've soaked it so much will lift up a bit, and when I certainly dry with a hairdryer, it'll probably lift up a bit as well. The other thing I will do, I will spray my watercolours. Now these are pan watercolours. I buy the tubes and then I squeeze the tubes into this palette. This palette is an inexpensive palette from Amazon. It's very useful for my needs. I will go through some of the colours as I paint. Now, as this is pretty much my first ever YouTube tutorial, I'm probably going to forget loads of stuff. I probably will forget names of colours and that sort of thing, but hopefully I remember. So I've wet the entire painting. Now I'm not going to, in any sense, cover it with any masking fluid or anything. I'm going to cover the entire piece of paper with colour. But what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and avoid putting too much of the blue on the cathedral. There will be some blue going on it, okay? But actually I'm going to try and minimize that colour, and I'll be covering up with darker paint anyway. So what I'm doing is I'm mixing just some cobalt blue. I love cobalt blue for a sky. It's quite a Turner-esque colour. He was very fond of using it. I'm not comparing myself to Turner, by the way. And I'm just going to start in a relatively easy way, laying down some colour. Now I just find like some more water there. If it dries too quickly, it's going to be difficult, okay? Now, I think further up the sky, we'd like it a bit darker. Okay, now you can already see I've got loads of blue on the cathedral. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to cover that up anyway. And also I want it to be sort of loose and some of those spires kind of melting in the background. Now, I'm going to put on a little bit of burnt sienna with this cobalt blue. So to give a little bit of a more mottled kind of cloudy shade. Also, I think I might add some yellow ochre here as well. I don't want to make a green, but what I want to do is just add a kind of a haze. Okay, a bit of a haze. Now that's going a tad green. Let's put a bit more blue there. There we go. And I think also I just want a tad more blue in some areas at the top, but I don't want to fiddle with it too much. Now, while this is all still wet, I'm going to take some of that burnt sienna, because Lichfield Cathedral's got quite a red stone, and I'm just going to, again, I'm just going to lay that in incredibly loosely, you know, as though I'm effectively, you know, painting a door. I don't really paint doors, but if I were to, I'd probably do it in this way. And I might add, for a bit of, again, a bit of change, I might add a bit of yellow ochre there, and maybe even some of the blue down at the base, just because I want it all to kind of blend in. I'm going to add a bit of blue here. That's good. I might just spray that just a bit. I don't really want that to be, yeah, that's all right. So all the clouds kind of are just sort of implied. I'm going to add a bit of blue here, okay, because it's going to be covered up eventually anyway. Bit more yellow ochre. Got some figures I've put in the front. Okay, you can see them there. I'm just going to cover everything up. Again, as you're kind of visual painting a door, and all I'm doing is using the colours that I've sort of already used. So cobalt blue, yellow ochre, some burnt sienna. The colour I haven't used yet, which I get through a lot of, is ultramarine blue, which, you know, I will be using. So you can see here, I mean, in a sense, when you think about it, you know, it's a bit counterintuitive that the grass here is currently blue. You know, I feel like it probably doesn't make that great deal of sense, but hopefully now what I'm going to do is, while it's still wet, just add in a bit more colour, a bit more intense colour here, because eventually we're going to have to see the cathedral. So that's some yellow ochre there mixed with a bit of burnt sienna, and I'm just going to lay some of these blocks in, and all straight down, kind of echoing the lines of the cathedral. I'm thinking about this as I'm doing it. I don't know if that's what I regularly do, it probably is. Right, and I'm going to call that done. Not the entire painting, obviously, but I'm going to dry it now with a hairdryer. Just as you see, a lot of that burnt sienna has come across into the sky, and over here it's coming. It doesn't really matter. All it's going to do, in my view, the way I like to paint, is it's going to hopefully make the cathedral sort of sink into the sky and make it less, make the lines less defined, which I think is one of the joys of watercolour, really. So I'm going to use the hairdryer, which hopefully in the edit I will be able to cut out of the sound, but who knows. Here it goes. Right, so that's pretty much dry. I'm just going to see it now. It probably looks, as you can see, it looks like it's all crinkled and all that kind of thing. Now, that is just a hazard of watercolour, and I haven't pre-stretched the paper, so I haven't wet it first and all that sort of thing. Okay, so it has all these bumps. You can easily get rid of these bumps, which I'll explain perhaps towards the end. Okay, but they're very easy to get rid of. So it may look, you know, that we've got all these pockets now of air behind, but actually that's not going to impede us really. Okay, so now the next thing I want to do is I'd like to focus, I think, on, shall I do the building first or the background? Let's do the building. Okay, so this is Lichfield Cathedral. It's a cathedral in England, in the UK, and it's in the Midlands, so it's quite close to Birmingham. And it's a beautiful cathedral. It's a medieval cathedral. It's the only three-spired medieval cathedral in England. The other three-spired cathedral is Truro, but that's not medieval, but still another beautiful cathedral. Now, what I'm going to start off with here is some of the shadow. I'm quite happy with the colour and the lightness because I want it to be in the sunshine, so I'm not going to add, in a sense, any more colour to the stone of the building, or at least I don't think I will at this point. But what I'm trying to now capture is the correct shadow on the building. Now, this is why having a reference, something you've drawn previously, is quite useful and quite helpful. Now, for the shadow colour, what I tend to use is ultramarine blue, which is the colour I use most. Indeed, they've got sort of 3 or 4 little bits of it here in the palette because I use it so regularly. So ultramarine blue, I'm mixing with burnt sienna. Okay, and you get this grey colour. I never really use black. I occasionally use Payne's grey, but I basically never use black. Now, this could be really too dark. Now, the shadow, I'm going to start on this side because I don't want my hand going into the paint. Now, I'm going to start, and here this could be too dark, it could be too light. It obviously dries lighter. Okay, then I'm going to put down. So, there, we started off and we've got some shadow there. Now I think probably I might want a bit more burnt sienna in there. It doesn't really matter if you change your sort of shadow colour as you go because it just adds to a greater kind of effect. And all I'm doing is I'm following where the shadow needs to be. So here I'm putting down the shadow for this little turret here, and we've got some shadow here. I mean, effectively for the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm just going to be concentrating on the shadow. I'm just making sure on here I've got the right angle. If I want to take any paint off, I can just dab that a bit. So now let's start. Now here, I've got to be very careful because it's only this, we can sort of see a little bit of the cathedral that juts out from behind the front. And so I need to be careful here, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to make it stand out too much. And I may need to go over this shadow. It looks quite, this wash, this shadow kind of colour looks quite weak, but it may suffice, we'll see. Okay, and that's the fun of painting, really. I mean, you don't know, it could work, it might not, who knows. This could be the worst painting I've ever done, which I guess would be quite amusing for a tutorial. So now the other thing, we've got this spire here, okay? So this spire, now that's casting a shadow here on this side of the building. So again, I'm not being terribly necessarily that careful. I'm doing it quite loosely because that's the style I sort of like, is giving an impression rather than the actual building. That's probably a bit thick there, but you know, you get the idea. So yeah, something of that kind. Yes, that should work. Now the thing is, because there are loads of statues on the front here, there are going to be loads and loads of various shadows. So what I might have to do, okay, at this point, in fact, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue using this large brush, and then I'm going to put the shadows in on the little statues that are on the front of the building. I will put those in with a smaller brush once I've gone over and dried this. Now, I've got to go and do this third spire at the back, but I'll do that in a second. Now, again, just have to be careful here of not being too heavy-handed with this shadow. And as I'm going down, I'm mixing slightly different tones of colour just to give a bit of variation. So I've just added there a bit of burnt sienna, and that adds a bit of variation to that shadow, makes it not one unified colour. And I've just added a bit more blue there to give a bit more grey. So now we've got a little bit more of an effect. Now, other points here I've got to remember about this shadow. Sometimes I break up the lines a bit because you don't want it too you know, too strong. There's a bit of shadow that we need here. And this, again, this little turret thing here, or whatever we'd call it, I'm not terribly sure. But whatever it is, it needs to have shadow. So, adding a bit of shadow in there. That's about right. And again, we've got the little shadows here. I mean, it's a very delicate process. It feels rather boring me just talking as I'm going through this, but hopefully it's useful and interesting, I hope. So again, now this here, I'm leaving a little bit of separation. Actually, there's no separation between this shadow and that shadow, if you can see what I mean, but I'm leaving the definition just so I can effectively reveal to the person looking at the painting that there is this little triangular bit of turret here that I want to indicate. Right, now, more exciting because we can deliver now a bit more straight down shadow here. So what I'm going to be doing is, as I'm going down, I'm going to be using different shadow colours. So I'm going to use ones with a bit more blue in, ones with a bit more raw sienna, and yellow ochre rather, and burnt sienna. Okay, so I'll start off with some burnt sienna here. You do not have to be perfect here, okay? We are just giving the impression, okay? And, you know, wanting to create the shadow of that architect. So now I'm adding a bit more blue. So you should be able to see, hopefully, the change in colour, okay? And I want to get that bit in because that's... And you notice I'm not going to be able to see the underdrawing now. So the underdrawing is really just a guide. You know, ultimately we're still going to be painting this. And then I'm going to go back to the blue briefly. Then as I come down to the bottom, I quite like to add in a bit of yellow ochre because I just think the bottom of this seems to have a bit more clarity to it. And so put that down there. And it doesn't really cause any problems for that shadow, but there we go. Now, this is an opportunity again, I'm just showing you the way I do it, but I think there's an opportunity here to have a bit of connection between shadows. So I can put some shadow here, and it goes over the door, but there is a little tiny bit which the light catches, and so we can leave that standing out, which works because it helps again to reveal the architecture. Okay, so that you've got a big bit of shadow there. As I say, we'll go back and do the more delicate shadow in a moment. Okay, but I'm just seeing other elements where I can possibly put in some shadow and make some elements of connection. Okay, so, and then there, a bit more there, and you get the idea. Okay, so we've got some shadow there, and as I say, I'll go back and add these bits. Oh, that's too much shadow, but whatever. In a little while, that looks all right. So there we go. Okay, now I'm going to go onto this side of the building. So we've got this little bit here. Now let's have a bit of burnt sienna. Now the thing is, there's actually different colours here on this building, but I'm not going to be too worried about them. You know, one of the things I will probably lighten the shadow here because I want to push this bit of the building a bit further back than the front. Just adding a bit of light red in here as well. Again, I mean, I don't even know whether you'll see it, but I can see it. And I think just, again, conveying something a bit more about the building than about its colour. And then we've got some, again, important bits there that give a sense of building. And again, it's not perfect, but gives the impression. I don't like that little splodge there, so get rid of that. Okay, now there's obviously a lot more bits where there's a bigger colour, so let's go and do those. I said what I would do is I would do all this side first, and then, but clearly I haven't stuck to that. I mean, I don't stick to anything really. But here we go. So I'm going to put this in, some shadow up here. Then the shadow on the figures again we'll do in a little while. As with these little sort of elements of what look like windows, but they're not. The windows are here, which we'll come to now. So I'm going to get a bit of, again, I've got this kind of grey colour with ultramarine blue and raw, or burnt sienna rather. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay in some shadow here. Now I'm not going to promise, but I probably will come back and put some more shadow on here, because once I've put the colour of the windows in, it might wash out some of this shadow. So in which case I'll come and add a bit more, but we'll wait and see. Okay, and then I'll add the shadow for the individual windows with the smaller brush. Now we've got this interesting Great West Door, it's actually referred to. It's actually called that here because it is at the west end of the cathedral. Now this is a little tricky, and I probably should use a smaller brush, but I don't appear to be, so. But I've got to just reflect again where the shadow falls here and what it's not falling on. It's not falling on a statue here, one of the statues. So again, and I'll come back and do that statue in a minute, and let's do this side here on this door. This is the main entrance that people use. I would encourage you to visit Lichfield Cathedral. It's a wonderful building, and there are wonderful people there. I used to work at Lichfield Cathedral years ago now, but it's a wonderful, wonderful place with wonderful people, and I would encourage you to visit if you can. So, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just dry this off. So again, I'll stop talking for a sec. Okay, so that's as good as dried. I've noticed that I'm already 26 minutes through, so I need to crack on a bit because I don't want this video to go on for hours, unless people, like that. But now what I need to do is I need to start, first of all, I'm going to paint the windows. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint these shadows, which is going to be that's going to take the longest time in this video, really, is painting that. And then the other things we can paint, the background and whatnot, we can paint in a lot more sort of loose manner. Now, in terms of the colour I'm going to put for these windows, I'm not going to use blue. They're kind of a grey, but with a little bit of a hint of some kind of green tone. So again, I don't know how dark or light this is going to be when I put it down, but I'm just going to see. I can probably get away with that because it'll dry a bit lighter. And I'll take a bit off the, because also don't forget what I've got to do here is I've got to make the shadows visible, and if the base colour is too dark, the shadow is not going to be visible. So, I mean, those windows are not perfect by any means, but, and then we've got little bits of detail here. We've got some circular windows. We've got this little bit here, and we've got another. The Trinity is sort of shown in a lot of things in the building. So, again, add a bit of darkness to that. So, there are all the windows done. Now, while I'm at it with a darker colour, before I go back and do these shadows, again, I don't even use burnt umber. I don't use a really dark brown. If I want a dark brown, I just mix burnt sienna with ultramarine blue. They're my most commonly used colours. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint the doors. Okay, and I probably, again, will go back over, but you see it's darkening for me with the shadow already there. It's doing some of the work for me, which is always helpful. And so you can see I'm adding those, and I may well come back and find, oh, that's not dark enough, I need darker colours, avoiding a little statue on that side. Fine. And then here, this door again is putting that in. That looks about right. Okay, so we've got now the doors in. Just a bit of darkness to that one. It's not very dark, but yeah, you get the idea. We've got those in. Now we need to get in the crazy amount of shadows for the building itself. Now, actually, on some of these, I'm going to use a much lighter shadow. Okay, with a bit more yellow ochre or raw sienna in it. Okay, and just see how that goes. In fact, I'll just give these blast of the hairdryer, as I don't want them to smudge. So hopefully they're dry. Yeah, they seem dry. So now we've got to do these. This cathedral is beautiful, but for the painter, it has so many statues on the front of kings and saints and things. So it's actually quite a time-consuming process to paint all these in. And I'm going to start with my tiny brush, okay, this liner brush, but I may move to this slightly bigger one if it gets too tedious. Now, these are just squiggles, these figures, okay, I mean, nothing more than that, really. What I'm trying to do is, what I'm trying to convey is, I think that's too light. That's too light shade. Okay, so I'm going to go for a different shade. There we go. All right, so I'll leave that one. You see, there we go. That's a better shade, I think. Somewhere in between those two would be perfect, but apparently I don't know. I can't do that. So, and you've got these lines again of this sort of, I don't know the exact term. I mean, maybe tracery. I guess you normally apply that to windows, but you get the idea. So we've got these figures here, and what I'm doing is, again, I'm drawing in this shadow, and that's basically going to give the front of this cathedral, it's going to bring it to life, hopefully, because it's, what I'm really interested in here is capturing this, you know, trying not to sound too artistic, but, you know, this, this, I can't think of a better word, so I'm going to use it anyway, this interplay between light and shadow. Sounds a very sort of highfalutin term, but that's what I'm looking for here, is to bring this to life in that way. So I'm doing these bits of tracery, and I don't want us to, if it's too dark, this would kind of jump out too much, and I don't want that. I want these figures to just, because these figures are all being lit as we look at the painting, they're all being, the sun is coming in from the right, so that's the way the shadow is being cast. Some of those might be a bit too weak. Add a bit more colour. As you're painting watercolour or anything, again, this is just my view, but I am adapting and changing things all the time as I'm looking at them and thinking, you know, what colours do I need to use here? Do I need to change that? And actually, in a sense, the variety, the fact that already I've got some that are more sort of raw sienna in colour and some that are more blue in colour and some that are more grey in colour, I think just adds to the effect of the reality of actually what we're seeing. Okay, now these ones below, these are actually a bit more recessed into the facade, into the front, so of the building. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these a bit darker. Okay, so I'm going to pick, these are actually a row of seated kings. The front, so kings of England on the front. I think Queen Victoria is on that as well somewhere. But here we go. So again, these are not detailed, as you can see. I'm not interested in detail here. I'm interested in something loose and relatively immediate. But you can see there's almost no detail as I'm putting these in. And it's just about, again, conveying the impression. But you can see I'm keeping the quote-unquote figures, because they're just blobs, really. Keeping the blobs. I prefer the word blob to king. Let's use the word blob. So I'm keeping these blobs light. Okay, I'm not covering them with paint. And all I'm doing is picking them out with this sort of mottly kind of grey colour. Again, I wonder whether I need to make some of these a little darker, but we'll see. That one won't be dark at all. It's too much water in there. So, okay, it should be a bit darker, or indeed exactly the same colour as I've used before. Great. So let's get a bit darker. So a bit more ultramarine blue, a bit more burnt sienna. I should really mix it with a bigger brush, really, because this brush is tiny. But you get the idea. Yeah, that's actually a better... That is the colour I should have done all these with. So I may have to go back over them. See what I mean? It's a... If you were expecting a tutorial where I knew actually anything, you know, sort of what I was talking about, I'm afraid that is. It's not the kind of tutorial I give. So I'm just going to go back and just put in a bit further, a bit more dark here, okay? I may have to do that with a bit above, but let's see how it goes, let's see how it goes. I don't like that amount of water there, let's take that out. You can see it's just a line. Okay, right, so, and we've got, the thing I like about this is you've got some variation here, and I do quite like that. Now, let's add a bit more yellow ochre here. So on this side, again, I'm going for a bit stronger colour here, and maybe I'll regret that. But that's a little stronger, although it will dry lighter, as with all watercolour. Now, I need to convey here, again, this sort of tracery work. But you've got the shadow being cast by the little saints here. These are, so it's the kings at the bottom, or blobs, as I was saying, and then these blobs at the top, they're saints. Okay, not that particularly, that might not matter to you, but there you go. They are saints. And, oh yeah. I mean, one of the things I would, you know, as I'm just doing this, I would say one of the reasons to visit cathedrals, I'm someone who's worked in and around cathedrals for a very long time, in addition to my painting. But unlike other sort of heritage venues, just to say I'm just going into the shadow I've put down and adding a bit of extra colour, because you can still get the essence of some of these figures, even if you can't see them as clearly as these others. But as I was saying, unlike other heritage venues, cathedrals are still, unlike say a castle, most castles are not performing the function that they were built to fulfill. Whereas cathedrals, the Lichfield Cathedral, there's been a religious sort of site there for about 1,300 years, and the cathedral that we're painting today, as we look at it, is about over 800 years old. And when you think about it, it's one of the only places you can sort of visit that is still performing the function, the original function it had when it was built, which makes it sets it apart in some sense from castles and other heritage buildings of that kind. So that's one of the things that makes, for me at any rate, makes cathedrals quite interesting. So I'm just doing these little sort of slats, and I've probably made them a bit too pronounced, but there we go. We're not running out of time, but I don't want you to take 2 hours doing this. Okay, so I'm just picking up some paint there, and yeah, okay. I said at the beginning also, just remembering what I said, which is that I think I've got enough colour on the building itself, so I don't need to. I'm not going to need to add any more because I want it just to be light. I'm probably going to have to add some more pigment onto this because it's as I look at it now, it looks like it needs more. Anyway, so let's continue with these shadows. So you can see here, this is just going to take a bit of time. That's too strong, that colour, but whatever. I'm going to add a bit more yellow ochre in because again, I want a bit of variation. But all I'm doing here is, again, shadow, all work on these shadows. But to be fair, it's only when this nears a bit of completion. What time are we on now? Goodness, we've been going for 39 minutes. I reckon this could be an hour-long tutorial, or longer. Imagine if it's longer, that wouldn't be good for my first tutorial, would it? An hour. So we still need to do these figures. I think we've got more saints. Oh, that's very blue. Oh dear. I think we need to go stronger on some of these. I'm painting on an angle, and just so you can see the palette. I would normally have the palette flat, but because I've got it at an angle, what I'm doing is I'm basically just blaming, the YouTube audience, because I'm doing this so that you can see what's going on, and actually a lot of the paint is running down because it's at an angle. So I'm just casually blaming you, but anyway, let's carry on. That's a better colour. I'm going to try and speed up a tad. I mean, I don't want to speed up too much, but get on. So I want the shadow colour. Add that shadow colour there that was too light. Okay. Again, we've got little bits of things to add here. Little bits of detail, a little bit of figures. Figures here. Again, that we can do. Another statue there. Okay. Now it's beginning slowly, very slowly, to come together. But we still have things to do. So another statue. I mean, why didn't I pick a building with fewer statues on the front? But I guess the thing is, YouTube is good for this. If you really want to know how I paint statues on the front of cathedrals, this is the video for you. There I've added again another bit of variation in that shadow. I haven't kept it all uniform. And I'm going to add a bit darker contrasting shadow here. And again, up here. Now up here we've got some more intense shadow, and there's a lot of, there's this sort of triangular sort of bit of architecture here that I need to just emphasize there. Again, I don't want to go too overboard here with this shadow, but I've got to get it in. So now other things I would just say, so I'm going to add a bit of yellow ochre here. Now what I want to just convey, now there isn't like a sort of a super long continuous line here, but what I want to do is just convey the lines along the sort of front of this cathedral, okay? And I can come back and add, but it just adds a bit more interest, it adds a bit more definition, even though they're not, they're sort of implied by other things. So still got some shadow to do at the top. Okay, so got shadow along here, along these lines. And again, I'm just going to, you don't need to spend, you know, an age on here. Now, we've got a very important figure. We've got the figure of Christ at the top here. So I'm just going to add the shadow there and some shadow along. Now you've got these various bits of, again, stone and tracery, but I'm not going to worry about the particular detail. I'm going to go a bit darker for the shadow on the cross at the top, because I want that to be seen. You know, it is a cathedral after all. That needs to be seen. Also, while I'm at it here, I'm going to be able to add this shadow in, well, that's a bit strong, to the spire at the back. So I'm just going to add that in, okay, because we've got to pick out that spire, otherwise the famous three spires are not going to be particularly picked out, okay. So other things I need to do, there are just more areas basically of shadow here that need to be added in. And this is, again, such a long process. But I would say this is a relatively large size of piece of paper, really. You know, so I would expect this to take probably an hour and a half, that sort of time. Anyway, I'm trying to go a little bit faster than I normally would. I would normally take just a bit more time over it. Yeah, as I'm going through, I'm just saying to myself, yeah, I'm definitely going to have to go back and add in some colour over the top. But that'll be quite an interesting process, because the way we do that, that's, you know, sort of adding a wash over the top, which is completely fine. Because in a sense, you've just got to see, you've got to read the painting and how it's coming across, because I feel the thing that's lacking here is we're not sort of being fully told the colour of the stone at the moment. So that's why I think I need to go back and add a bit more in, a bit more definition to some of these colours, because it's a bit weak at this point. Not that that's a bad thing, but... And I think what we will do is we will add that before we start adding all the other things. So I'm just adding a few details here to various bits of, again, of tracery. These can be a bit, I can go a bit, you know, add a bit more colour here. Because again, I want to use more of this colour in the actual wash on top of the painting. Get the idea. I don't want to overwork it. You must always be careful about overworking things. One of the things that's majorly lacking here that I need to do is I need to put the shadow on the windows, the main windows. So I'm going to do that next. So let's get some of my shadow colour. And I'm just going to put that here. You know, so we're leaving bits of the original colour of the window around. And we've got to actually make sure the shadow colour actually stays. So there you go. And that, again, just adds a bit more definition, brings out the reality a bit here, okay? And there'll be also shadow cast here, these various parts. Okay. So there we've got shadow to the windows. I need to bring a little more shadow here. Okay, but again, that's a very weak colour. Okay, now I think for the shadow portion here, that's pretty good. There are still, you'll always see elements whereby, oh yes, I could add a little more shadow there, that could have a little more definition, etc. I'm just adding again just to emphasize the separation of things here. There are bits of, again, these cinquefoils, okay, and trefoils, nice terms, fancy terms that are around. Okay, so you can see here that some of the building is just too blue. I need to add more colour there, but I can put that on the top. Okay, so what I'm going to do is dry it and then add a bit of colour on the top, and then we'll move on to the rest of the picture. Okay, so now I'm going to use this mop brush, as I believe it's called. Now I'm going to get some raw sienna. I think I'd rather use raw sienna than yellow ochre, just because it's a bit more gentle, I think, for me, than yellow ochre. I do love yellow ochre, but I'm also going to get some of one of my favourites, burnt sienna. I'm just going to create this very light wash, okay? Because I can add more if I want, but it's very difficult to take colour away. Now you see, now what I'm not going to do is I'm going to try not to massively go over areas of shadow, because that colour could lift. So, and I like the little flecks of lightness on it anyway. So as you can see, I'm just going to, this is, by the way, this is quite backwards to how I would normally paint. I wouldn't normally be going over, but obviously when I'm doing a tutorial, I haven't made the colour dark enough. But so let's just add that on. But you see, I'm doing it very lightly, almost sort of like dabbing, and that again, that colour will dry lighter anyway. Now what I can do, again, if I think later on in the picture that, oh, I really could have done with a bit more in the way of shadow and darkening the shadow, I can easily come and darken the shadow, okay? But I don't want to lift the shadow away by making this too watery. Now, if there are spots where I want to, let's say, look here, let's say I want to just make that much more strong and then make the other a bit lighter. Again, what I'm going to do actually, though, is I'm going to try and avoid going on at this point to the spire at the back. I'm going to leave that a bit because I want that to be, again, recessed from the rest of the cathedral. Okay, so now I think that is a much stronger image already. That's a much better colour. Can see areas here where I need to add a bit more shadow, but I will do that towards the end and our finishing touches. Now this bit of the building I wanted to stay quite far back, so I'm just going to lighten the colour even more. Okay, and I think for the time being that on the cathedral itself will suffice. Okay, so I'm going to dry that now. Right, now we can see elements here where I think I need to go back and sort of add some more shadow. I'm just going to just add a bit of, regain a bit of shadow on some of these places where I think I've lost it just a little, but only a tad. I quite like the mottled effect here, and as I say, I don't want to overwork the painting. So that'll do. Right, now let's get on to the actual I've got the other part of the picture. So we've got some areas of grass here, okay, and we've got trees here and we've got some buildings here. So what I want to do is I'm going to put my hand across. I don't want to spray the cathedral particularly much, but I do want to get some blending of colour here. So what we need is some green for the grass, okay, not too green, and then we need the colour of the road. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the colour of the road in first, I think, okay, which will be some kind of grey, maybe with a bit of brown. I don't want it to be too blue or anything, so here we go. I'm just going to put this in like this. I'm not going to worry about these figures. Now as we get closer to me, I'm going to darken it a little bit with some blue. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's not perfect, it really doesn't matter. And there's a wall here as well, so I'm just going to suggest that. I'll go through these people, it doesn't really matter, because they are cast in shadow anyway. So now I'd like a bit of raw sienna here, just to again add a bit of light and whatnot to this road, and again just variation. So here we go, a bit of variation at the front there, going up there, and you get the idea. Now I want more spray to keep that alive. Now let's add some green. So I've got some green here. Now I don't actually know what colour green this is. Forgive me, but I don't remember. But whatever the green is, I'm adding some burnt sienna to it again, because I just use it all the time. Some lemon yellow, just to, because it is quite, I want quite a bit of lightness here. Now there's a board or sign here. I'm going to try and do some negative painting, so I'm just going to avoid the sign, okay, because I want that to be relatively light. Now that green, I don't like the green too intense, but I think that is just a bit too weak. Now here, we need the grass to be quite bright and light, but at the same time, it's going to be largely covered up with shadow anyway. Okay, let's just try this as a mixture. And as you see, in long brush strokes, it doesn't matter if it breaks up a bit, but more water, okay, because I want these colours to blend together. I don't want them to be too static, really don't. And it doesn't matter if you've got a variety of greens. There's some green at the back there, so I'm just going to plop that in, okay. So, and the key thing here is what will happen is once this dries, again, it's going to be the shadow that goes on it, so that will, I'm just adding a bit more lightness here, a bit more strength in terms of the pigment. So it looks, I mean, it looks green obviously, but there's a lot of yellow in it. There really is a lot of yellow here. And then that, okay. So, and that's fine, okay, I think that's all right. It's a tad yellow, but it is going to be covered up by shadow. Just add a bit of, now you can, if you want to be artistic, you can flick a bit of water on it and just break up some of the grass a little bit. It's what it does is just adds a bit of texture in something that's sort of otherwise a very flat sort of medium. So that's a lot of flicked onto there, but that's fine. Now while that's still wet, I'm not going to dry that. I'm going to just add here. Now this is a kind of an autumn scene, and so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose some colours for the trees that will have a bit of green, but actually will also have some that are a bit more kind of, using brown a bit more. And I'm just using the side of my brush to just suggest these trees, like so. And the reason I've wet the paper is, again, what I want is, I want a kind of lighter, soft sort of edges. Now I'm going to make it a bit darker as we come towards the bottom, okay? These trees I'm going to make darker, and there's the deanery there at the back, which is this sort of Georgian mansion, and there's a palace at the back here. But again, I just want that to be hinted at. because otherwise it'll dominate the picture, which I don't want. I'll add a little bit of darkness to the very base of some of these, but again I can put some added shadow in later on, but I don't want that to talk. So, you know, the trees, we took ages over the cathedral, but the trees we did relatively quickly. I'm just dabbing in little bits here, just to add again a bit of interest and a variety. And I think we can leave that at that. These buildings on the other side, again, see, we're going pace now. We're nearly an hour. So I think realistically it's going to be about an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half. I mean, when I upload this, the timing will already be done. But, right, so I'm leaving this wet, by the way, because again, I want these soft edges. Now, this colour I've got, this is light red mixed with a bit of burnt sienna. I'm trying to leave a few gaps for windows, and you know, because a lot of these windows seem to be white on the edge, so I'm not going to leave everyone with you know, complete levels of detail, because the main area of interest for us here is the cathedral. So I don't need these buildings to be detailed. In fact, I would say I'd go out of my way to make these buildings not detailed, because otherwise it will be a distraction from what the painting is really about. The painting is about this cathedral. I kind of think I've made it too dark now, but that should be all right. In fact, one of the things that one can do is if I felt that I'd made the facade of the cathedral, by putting that wash over that I'd made it too dark, what I can do is I can spray it with a bit of water, I can lift off a bit of colour, or the other thing I can do is I can just adjust the shadows and make the shadows darker, and that will make the painting again come out a little more. So I'm just filling in bits of these variety of buildings. I'm leaving various gaps of white to... The key thing, what I'm trying to do is delineate the buildings, essentially, so that it doesn't just seem like one mass of colour. So, and then I need some grey, so in order to get some grey, I'll take some ultramarine blue. There we go, and I'll add a bit of, again, a bit of burnt sienna. I seem to use it all the time. And these can be relatively light, and it doesn't matter if the red mixes in with the grey. That's no problem. A bit of brown. I want a bit of variety here. I'll make that a bit brown. So you see, these buildings are in no way detailed at all. In fact, they're a bit of a mess. But what I will do is I'll be adding shadow to those to bring them out a bit more. Okay. So, and the other thing I've sort of forgotten is the chimneys I need to do. So let's put that here. Chimney, and we've got quite a long chimney there, I think. Yeah, so now let's think about the other things I need to add. So there are these sort of kind of gate posts. Again, this is wet in wet. I haven't dried the paper yet, as you see. So it's just because it allows a bit of contrast with the detail of the building. I mean, I wouldn't do this every time, but you know, and then we've got these bushes here that I want to, again, just dab in. I don't want them to be too distracting, ideally. There we go. You get the idea. Right, I'm going to use the old hairdryer now. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is add some more shadow here to these buildings. Now once I've added the shadow there, what I'm going to do is then I will paint in the figures. I'm then going to put the shadow across the foreground. This sign, what I'll probably have to do is I'll probably come back on that with a bit of gouache or something, or I may be able to leave it as it is, we'll see. Okay, now I'm going to use this brush, okay, because it's more of the right size to add the shadow, so my shadow colour is the same. So it's ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, okay. There's a bit of green there, I need to get rid of that. But, see, the thing is, I'm not terribly good at keeping my the palette as logically kept as it might be. Okay, right, so we need to make these buildings dark and recessed into the back with their correct shadow. But again, I'm not going to cover everything because it wouldn't particularly work if I were to do that. But because I've left the windows white, they're still going to potentially read to the eye somewhat. And let me just make sure that line is correct there. Then, again, as I'm coming closer, I'm just diluting the shadow just a bit. Okay, and again, those windows are still going to read. Okay, so now we've got that shadow there, and that's going across into the road. Okay, now on the side of the building, we've got to put the shadow in that's coming in from the building across the road, as it were. Now I need to also bring in the roof. That needs to be in shadow. Again, yeah, okay. But here, we've got the sort of that being told there, that way. So you'll still get the colour of the red coming through. And now we've got, these buildings are basically all cast in shadow. There can be areas where I would leave bits of white just to indicate, bits of light that are coming through. But as you see, that is just very, very loose in terms of how that's done. Now, what I need to do now is I need to add shadow going across here, but I need to paint in these figures first. Now, figures, you can't see any detail on these figures at all. But generally what I do is for the head, I use this light red. Doesn't matter if they're wearing a hood or whatever, but I use a light red to pick them out. They're going to be covered anyway. And then just some dark clothing colours, really. I'm just using a bit of a mixture of blue here for this character. And then perhaps some yellow ochre for legs. Okay. And they just need to be very simple. They don't need to be complicated at all, really. Best if they're not complicated. And then this person's got a little shopping bag. Okay. Again, I'll use a slightly different colour for their trousers. Let's imply jeans, perhaps. That would be good, wouldn't it? Okay. So they're on their merry way. Now I'll let them dry but they are going to be covered up. Most of that colour you won't see in the end, okay, because they'll be covered up with shadow. Now I think I want to make these something a bit more of these bushes, because I've implied these bushes here, but actually let's add just a little bit more detail to flesh them out a tad, okay? And it just needs to be that, really. We've also got a wall. I need to have the wall. I want it to be relatively warm colour. I don't want it to be too grey, because again, that is going to be covered up by the shadow. Okay. Now the wall goes down here. I don't want to interfere with these characters, so I'll just write it like that. Okay. And there's no detail to it. Okay. The only thing I might do is I might get a darker colour and just add it at the bottom. Because, again, that implies something about the stone. It implies that, I'm just implying things here. You get the idea. Not perfect, but it tells a story. Right. Then this, I probably want to add a little bit. And again, this will be covered in shadow. This is all going to be covered in shadow. There's a canon's house over here. Now, Canon, one of the priests of the cathedral, that is casting shadow of the rest of the image. So I can add a bit of detail there. They're going to be covered up anyway. Okay, so just it's a bit. Now the other thing I just want to do before I do that, just get some, keep this so you can see it, ultramarine blue and raw sienna, those colours that I keep using for the dark colours. And I just want to very lightly kind of, should have done this with the other brush really, let's do that, let's switch to the other brush. You know, just quite lightly, again, not a full line, but just again imply this, so it takes the eye to that location. Okay, it's not these lines actually exist, but it helps delineate the painting. You know, there's this bit up here. I'm not using a full thing, but you know, it gives. And that's maybe a bit too much. So, you know, what I can do is I can use a bit of kitchen roll to take some off. Okay, if I think it's a bit too heavy, right? And let's now look at, if I dry this, I can then do the shadow. Okay, now, if I don't get this shadow right, you know, it could ruin the painting. I mean, that's maybe a tad of exaggeration, but I need to try to get this shadow as right as I can. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this brush. These sort of Chinese writing brushes, the only problem is they do tend to lose their hair quite a lot, but I can put a lot of paint on and I can do it in one motion. I'd like to do the shadow all in sort of one. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I want to just get it as close to as I can. So, same colour I'm using for my shadow. Lots of ultramarine blue. I'm putting that in. Now let's move that a bit closer there. So ultramarine blue, and ooh, that is a lot of burnt sienna. So I'll have to counteract that. We're sort of a neutral colour now. I've just got some paint on it. Doesn't really matter, but there you go. Also needs water, but it needs to make sure that we read the shadow, okay? So now the shadow effectively needs to, I mean, I could sort of almost draw it on. The shadow needs to come over here, but we need to leave some gaps here. We need to cover this. We need to tell the story of these little sort of, you know, parapets that are coming from the house over here, the cannon's house, and then go sort of up here, and then we need a shadow behind the this sign, so we'll put that in again, probably with the same brush. There needs to be shadow back here that's being cast by the cathedral itself, okay, and into darkness there might be a bit of shadow there. So I sort of know the direction in which I'm going with this shadow, but there needs to be gaps of, you know, where the light is coming. That needs to also read as well. So let's just go for it, okay. So I'm going to put some shadow in here, and I might go over these buildings again just a tad, okay, because it needs to be the same kind of shadow here. Yeah, let's go over these buildings again. Yeah, okay. Now, it doesn't matter if I go over these figures, I need to go over the figures, okay. I want to sort of do it before it dries, but I need clean edges, so that's why I'm not putting on the spray bottle first, okay? Because all these need to be covered, but the lines, okay, various things, these bushes are all going to be in shadow, okay, but we want to see that read there. So again, put some more shadow colour. It will dry lighter, of course. So I'm putting these in. This is all going to be covered in shadow. So we've got those blocks. Okay. Now I need to just make some of these a bit further down like that. Okay. Not perfect, but it'll read as a shadow. Okay, now I want to add here this shadow. So there's little bits poking out there and there. And I can just cover all these things because they need to be in shadow. If I want to go back and add something, you know, more to those bushes or more to that wall, I can do so. Okay, but I need to have all this shadow in place. I'm going to make it a little darker and bluer towards this. Add a bit of interest, having that blue shadow there. But you get the idea. And then this shadow here I want to add. So this signpost. That's all right. And then this shadow towards the back. So there's some little bit of shadow here, and then you've got this shadow for the cathedral. Okay, and that's going to again help just push that a bit. And we've got some shadow there. These, you know, trees and things. But effectively, that shadow there, and we've got some shadow, lighter shadow here. Might give a little paint to that, the deanery later. But as you can see, as it's drying, we've got the figures reading again, we've got these reading again, and so our focus can remain on the cathedral, which is good. A few things that, you know, they're probably quite useful that I'll talk about in a minute. I'll just go through and dry. Right, so now the painting is nearly complete here. There are just a few things I want to think about adding. So I wanted to just add a little bit of a hint of colour to the deanery here. Just a hint. That's too much for that, really, but just a hint of it. Okay, and then a hint of the roof as well. Okay, it's probably a bit too much, but I can dab it out. And there's just the merest hint of a building. Okay, perhaps add a bit more on a couple of the chimneys there, and that sort of, and I dab that off, and that reads as, you know, it's not competing with anything else. Other things I want to add, there's a little wall here that I just want to give a little bit of colour to add a bit more interest. Okay, and there's actually a little building here as well I can add just a little bit of interest to. That's, I know that's quite strong, it might look quite strong on the thing, but it's just something I think it's worth adding. Okay, just to give that impression. Maybe a bit more colour on that tree perhaps. Okay, yeah, that's good. Yes, so other things I just want to emphasise this path a bit more up there. I think in terms of the shadow of the cathedral, there are some areas just like here. I just want to emphasize some of the shadows just a bit more, but I'm relatively happy with most of the shadows here. Some areas I think, oh yes, we could do a little bit more, perhaps on this window. Here's one, I add a bit more, not too much. Okay, and you notice I'm using the bigger brush now just to, you know, add a bit more emphasis to some of these lines. And I'm dabbing away anything that's too strong. It's got a very useful thing to be able to do. Again, a bit of there. Perhaps some of these, I'll just pick out a few of these that are rather light and add a little more definition. Okay, so. And they probably look on the screen look too dark now. Now this sign is like bright and white, and you know, probably need to do something with that in a minute. Other thing I want to do before I call this completed, I want to add just a bit more reading of this wall. Okay, like so. And that's kind of tells that, and then the bushes have kind of just gone. So let's add in Just again, a hint of those. I seem to have painted them 3 times, but whatever. And then the little posts there, give that a bit more, so that it can actually be seen. So yes, the actual post there. Now what I could do is I could put, I could use some white gouache or white acrylic on it. And what I might try and do is just take out a bit of the colour. So if I wet my brush, and this green that I said didn't really matter, does seem to have mattered. So I take some kitchen roll and just lighten it a bit. And I think that's probably better than going back and adding all this gouache to it. So just a few finishing touches really. And we're approaching an hour and 20 minutes, so this is far longer than I thought it was going to be. But there we go. Just want to add to this wet wall, just again another bit of definition. That might be too much. Maybe on the top there as well. No. Let me take that up a little bit. I just want to do a few things to show that it's a wall there, basically. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that that's pretty much finished. A few things I might change in a moment, but let's just dry it off. Right, now a few things I want to do before I sign it. Just very briefly, I want to add, you just notice these things that you may have missed. So a little bit of colour here, that's far too much colour. Just on the top of that, okay, and maybe there. And I think, this is the danger. The danger is overworking, okay? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that's almost finished, and I'll sign it in a sec. I'm just going to add a bit of definition to this sign, actually, on the outside, because it doesn't really matter what it actually says, you know. But let's add a bit of information. There we go. And then you can sort of tell it more what it's supposed to be, okay, normally. Now, let's sign it. So I get my thin brush, and I need a colour that's going to, you know, not sort of distract too much, but it's still legible. So I'm going to take some cobalt blue and some ultramarine blue. So I've got a nice dark blue colour, okay, and I'm going to put my signature, A-N-W. Okay, so I'm going to call that pretty much complete. I think there are things that I might do differently. Took quite a long time to paint the cathedral, but actually I think largely it works as a painting. There might be some things I do with some of the shadows down here, just emphasize them a bit more. Maybe I could take some of the colour off perhaps, but I think it's largely done. Now I am on Etsy, ANW Watercolours. So my name is, I don't think I introduced myself at the beginning, but my name's Alex Nicholson-Ward. I'm a teacher, but also an artist, and this has been a painting of Lichfield Cathedral. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I should hopefully be putting up more tutorials, but hopefully they'll be a bit shorter next time. As I say, my work is for sale. I can be commissioned, but it is for sale on Etsy, and you can follow me on Instagram and I believe TikTok as well, if I'm right. So yeah, that's Lichfield Cathedral. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any questions for me, please put them in the comments, and hopefully I will see you another time. Now, I've just let that dry, and I realised that before I should have signed off, I should have done the nice bit of taking off the masking tape, which I'll do now. See, it's my first time, you see, making this video. So now you see, as it's dried, you see how much it's flattened out from the beginning. Just be careful when you take off this, because if you're not using good quality paper, or if you're quite you know, if you take this off too recklessly, you may end up pulling paper off the painting and pulling paint off, which you don't want to do. So it's just quite a nice thing to be able to then take off and have it sort of have it framed by those white edges. And there we go. And there it is, Lichfield Cathedral in watercolour.